The most powerful stories often come from those who remain nameless. We give a voice to the anonymous and a face to the forgotten in our latest series of emotional dramas. Subscribe today and help us tell the stories that matter.
My husband's cologne was wrong. That was the first thing I noticed. Not lipstick on a collar, not a suspicious text message, not the classic signs everyone warns you about. Just the cologne. After 11 years of marriage, I knew every note of the fragrance my husband wore. Cedar and sandalwood, the bottle I bought him every Christmas without fail. But one Tuesday in March, he came home smelling like something sharper, something younger, something that wasn't mine to recognize. I told myself I was being paranoid. I was very good at telling myself that. My name is Elena, and at 38 years old, I thought I had built exactly the life I wanted. A 3-bedroom house in a quiet suburb of Charlotte, a job I was genuinely proud of as a senior auditor at a mid-sized financial consulting firm, and a husband, Marcus, who was the kind of man other women complimented me on at dinner parties. Charming, put together, a VP of commercial lending at Hartwell Regional Bank, the kind of institution that sponsored Little League teams and had its name on a hospital wing. We had met in our late 20s at a work conference, bonded over terrible hotel coffee and a mutual distrust of PowerPoint presentations, and built something I believed was solid. We didn't have children by choice, a choice we had made together, deliberately and never regretted. We traveled. We had friends. We had a routine that felt like comfort rather than stagnation. Or so I believed. The cologne thing nagged at me for a week before I let myself follow it anywhere. My job had trained me to follow small inconsistencies, to understand that a single number out of place in a spreadsheet was never actually a single number. It was always the surface of something deeper. But I didn't want to apply that skill to my own marriage. Nobody does. Then came the credit card statement. I handled our personal finances. Marcus preferred to focus on the big picture. He always said, the investments and the retirement planning, while I kept track of the day-to-day. It was an arrangement that had worked fine for years. But that April, reviewing the monthly statement the way I always did, I found a charge I didn't recognize. $47 at a restaurant called Olea Kitchen in the Dilworth neighborhood of Charlotte. A Tuesday night. Marcus had told me he'd worked late that Tuesday. He'd come home at 10, eaten the leftovers I'd saved him, kissed my forehead, gone to bed. Olea Kitchen closed at 9:30. I didn't confront him. I want to be clear about that, because I know what some people would do. I know what the emotionally satisfying version of this story looks like. The version where the wronged wife slams the statement down on the kitchen counter and demands answers. I didn't do that. I am an auditor. I know that you don't tip your hand until you understand the full scope of what you're looking at. Confronting someone before you have the complete picture only gives them time to build a better lie. So instead, I started paying attention. It was not dramatic, what I did next. It was tedious and methodical and, at times, deeply boring. I started keeping a separate document, password protected, stored on a personal laptop Marcus didn't know I owned, which I had bought years ago for freelance work I'd since stopped taking. I logged dates, times, inconsistencies, the Tuesday dinners that didn't add up, the weeknight where he said he was at a client event but the bank's public calendar showed nothing scheduled, the weekend afternoon he went to play golf with a colleague named Derek, a colleague who, when I happened to run into his wife at the grocery store 2 weeks later, mentioned that Derek had been home all weekend with a stomach bug. I didn't let myself feel anything yet. That was a decision I made consciously, the way you make a decision to hold your breath underwater. Feeling would come later. Right now there was only information. 6 weeks in, I found the company. I wasn't even looking for it directly. I was cross-referencing some of our joint tax documents from the previous year, something I did every spring as part of preparing for our accountant, when I noticed a deduction I didn't recognize. A business expense listed under a sole proprietorship called Calverton Advisory Group. Marcus had explained it at the time as a consulting side project, something he was doing informally for a smaller bank up in Concord, nothing significant. I had nodded and moved on because I had no reason not to. Now I looked closer. Calverton Advisory Group had an EIN. It had a registered agent. It had a business address on file with the North Carolina Secretary of State's office, a suite in a commercial building in the South End neighborhood, a neighborhood I knew well because our firm had a client with offices there. I searched the property records for the suite. It was leased. The lease, as far as I could determine from public records, had been signed 18 months ago. 18 months ago, Marcus and I had been planning a trip to Portugal. I sat with that for a long moment. Then I kept digging. The registered agent for Calverton Advisory Group was a woman named Diane Forsyth. I didn't know that name. I searched it carefully. LinkedIn, public records, the bank's staff directory, which I had legitimate access to through my own firm's professional database. Diane Forsyth was not a banker. She was not a consultant. According to her LinkedIn profile, which was sparse but public, she was a freelance brand strategist who had previously worked in marketing for a luxury real estate agency. I looked at her photograph for a long time. She was attractive in a polished, careful way. Late 30s. Dark hair. The kind of professional headshot that suggests someone who takes their image seriously. I felt something shift behind my sternum, but I pressed it back down. Not yet. Over the following 2 weeks, I made it my business to understand Calverton Advisory Group completely. I was careful. I never did anything that could be considered illegal, never accessed accounts I wasn't authorized to see. But I knew how to read public records. I knew how to trace business filings. I knew how to follow financial threads through the legitimate paper trail they always leave behind. It's what I did for a living. I was very, very good at it. What I found made my hands go cold. Calverton Advisory Group had received payments, significant ones, from 3 different small businesses that were themselves clients of Hartwell Regional Bank's commercial lending division, my husband's division. The payments were structured as consulting fees, logged in a way that looked unremarkable at first glance, the kind of line items that would slide past a routine review. But they weren't unremarkable. They were a pattern. The businesses that had paid Calverton Advisory Group had all received unusually favorable loan terms in the previous 2 years. Terms that, from what I understood of standard commercial lending practice, didn't align with their credit profiles. My husband was running a kickback scheme. I needed to sit down. I sat down. I looked at the wall of my home office for approximately 4 minutes, doing nothing at all. Then I got up and made coffee because I needed to think clearly, and clarity required caffeine, and I was not going to fall apart in my own kitchen. The scale of it was what got me. This wasn't a mistake or a moment of weakness. This had been running for at least 18 months, probably longer. The company was real. The structure was deliberate. The arrangement between Marcus and Diane Forsyth, whatever the full nature of it was, had enough mutual benefit to sustain itself quietly for a year and a half while I cooked dinner and scheduled travel and lived in a house with a man I apparently did not know. I spent another week building the full picture. I documented everything, every business filing, every public payment record, every thread I could follow without crossing a legal line. I organized it the way I organized audit findings at work, clearly, completely, with sources noted and a logical chain of evidence that could be followed by someone who hadn't done the research themselves. I cross-referenced Marcus's work calendar, which he kept on a shared Google Calendar we had originally set up for coordinating our personal schedules, and which he had apparently forgotten I still had access to. On a Thursday evening in late May, while Marcus was at what his calendar described as a client dinner, I drove to the South End. I want to be honest about this part. I drove there with no plan other than to see it with my own eyes. The building was real, which I already knew, but there is a difference between a business address in a database and a place you can stand in front of and look at. The suite was on the 3rd floor. The building lobby directory listed Calverton Advisory Group with a small placard, the kind that suggested a permanent, settled presence, rather than a temporary arrangement. I sat in my car across the street for 40 minutes. Marcus's car was not in the lot. I didn't know what I had expected to find. I drove home. The following week, I contacted an attorney. Her name was Patricia, and she had been recommended by a colleague at my firm who had gone through a divorce 3 years earlier and described her as the kind of lawyer who makes the other side very uncomfortable. I liked that description. I made an appointment and I brought my documentation, printed, organized, with a table of contents, and I laid it out for her on the conference table in her office on a Monday afternoon. Patricia read through it slowly. She asked me 4 clarifying questions. Then she looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "You did this yourself?" "It's all public record," I said. "I just organized it." She was quiet for a moment. "Elena, I need you to understand something. What you have here isn't just grounds for divorce. What you're describing, if it holds up, and based on what I'm seeing, I believe it will, is bank fraud. potentially wire fraud. This needs to go to the right people. I know, I said. That's why I'm here. What I had understood, working through all of this alone at my kitchen table at midnight, was that I needed to be very careful about the order of operations. Going to Marcus first would be a catastrophic mistake. Handing him the evidence of his own crimes and expecting him to respond with honesty would be naive to the point of absurdity. Going to the bank first without legal protection could expose me to complications I didn't need, and there was something else I had figured out, something that required a particular kind of care. Diane Forsyth. I had established this through additional research. I am somewhat sheepish about how many hours it took. Was married. Her husband's name was Robert Forsyth. Robert Forsyth was an assistant United States attorney for the Western District of North Carolina. I had needed a full day to process that particular discovery. The irony was so dense it was almost architectural. My husband had been conducting a financial fraud scheme through a company registered to a woman whose husband prosecuted financial crimes for a living. Whether Diane Forsyth knew the full nature of what Calverton Advisory Group was, I couldn't determine. Whether her husband knew anything at all, I also couldn't determine. What I did know was that Robert Forsyth could not be the person who received this information. The conflict of interest was obvious and would complicate everything. Patricia agreed with my assessment immediately when I explained it. We go to the FBI field office, she said. Financial fraud of this nature, potential bank fraud involving federally insured deposits, that's federal jurisdiction anyway. It bypasses the question entirely. I nodded. I had actually already looked up the Charlotte field office address before our meeting, but I let Patricia lay it out for me because I was paying her to guide this process and I wanted her fully in the driver's seat from here. We filed a formal report 6 days later. Patricia came with me. I brought the documentation. The two agents who took our meeting were professional and unhurried in a way that I found unexpectedly calming. They asked methodical questions. They requested copies of everything. They told us they would be in touch. Before I walked out of that building, I felt, for the first time since March, that I could breathe at a normal pace. Marcus was arrested on a Wednesday morning 11 weeks later, at the bank, before his 9 o'clock staff meeting. I was not there to see it. I was at my own office sitting in a quarterly review with 2 colleagues, when my phone lit up with a call from Patricia. I excused myself to take it in the hallway. It happened, Patricia said. This morning. He's been taken into custody. I stood in the hallway outside my conference room and looked at the water stain on the ceiling tile that had been there since I joined the firm. Okay, I said. Are you all right? I thought about it. Yes, I said. I think I actually am. The charges, as they were eventually specified, included bank fraud, wire fraud, and commercial bribery. The investigation, which I came to understand later, had been moving faster than typical because federal prosecutors were highly motivated by a case involving falsified lending records, also revealed that Calverton Advisory Group had been used to funnel a portion of the kickback payments into personal expenditures, a leased BMW, travel, and yes, a down payment contribution on a condominium in the No-Down neighborhood that was not in my name or Marcus's name, but in the name of a Shell LLC that Diane Forsyth had signed for. He had helped buy her a home. I would be lying if I said that particular detail didn't land differently than the rest of it. Everything else, the fraud, the lies, the second life running parallel to our marriage, I had processed into something manageable through the sheer discipline of treating it as a professional problem to be solved. But that detail, the condo, the down payment made from money stolen from small businesses in our city, something about it sat in my chest in a way the rest didn't. I gave myself one evening to feel it. I ordered Thai food, and I sat on the couch and I let myself be angry and sad in the way I hadn't allowed since March. Then I woke up the next morning and I went back to work. The divorce proceeded with considerably less drama than the criminal case, which is to say it still took 8 months and cost more in legal fees than I want to calculate. Patricia was exactly as uncomfortable for the other side as my colleague had promised. Because the marital assets were intertwined with the proceeds of criminal activity, the financial settlement required careful carving. What emerged, after considerable negotiation and the involvement of a forensic accountant, a colleague of mine as it turned out, which felt appropriately symmetrical, was a settlement that left me with the house, my retirement accounts, and a financial position that was stable in a way I hadn't been certain it would be during the worst weeks of all of this. Marcus's attorney argued at one point that I had known about the scheme because I handled our personal finances. It was the argument I had anticipated from the beginning. The reason I had been so precise about using only public records. The reason every step I took was documented and above board. Patricia dismantled it efficiently. My own firm's internal records showed the nature of my legitimate work. The FBI investigation had found no indication of my involvement. The argument went nowhere. What I didn't expect, what I want to be honest about, because this is the part that surprised me most in the end, was how I felt about Diane Forsyth. I had expected to feel something harder toward her, rage maybe, or contempt. She had been part of this, had benefited from it, had built a company that was essentially a vehicle for my husband's criminal activity, and called herself his business partner. But when I eventually learned, through the legal proceedings, that she had cooperated with federal investigators almost immediately upon being contacted, that she had, in fact, provided documentation that corroborated and extended my own findings significantly, I found I couldn't sustain the emotion I'd been prepared to feel. She had made her own choices. She was facing her own consequences. I didn't need to carry anything on her behalf. Her husband recused himself from any professional involvement in the case the moment it became relevant to his office, which was the correct and only appropriate action. I noted it without surprise. The condo in Noda, as it turned out, had to be liquidated as part of the asset recovery process. Marcus did not get to keep it. Nobody did, for a while. It sat in legal limbo for almost a year before being sold at a price that partially offset the amount owed to the defrauded businesses. I know, because the sale was a matter of public record, and old habits die hard. There is a question I get asked, in the version of this story I've told to close friends over the past year, that I want to try to answer honestly. The question is some variation of, how did you stay so calm? How did you treat it like a job instead of a devastation? The honest answer is that I didn't, entirely. The calm was real, but it was also a choice I made deliberately, because the alternative, coming apart at the seams during the 6 months when everything depended on me being precise and thorough and clear-headed, was a choice I couldn't afford. I let myself feel it in doses. I cried in my car twice, once in the parking garage at work, and once outside a CVS at 11 p.m. because I had gone to buy toothpaste and a song came on the radio that Marcus and I had danced to at a cousin's wedding 8 years ago. I felt it. I just didn't let it run the operation. What I've come to understand, a year and some months on the other side of all of it, is that the marriage I thought I was protecting when I started all of this was already gone before I found the credit card statement. The man I thought I had built a life with had made choices, repeatedly and deliberately, that unmade everything he claimed to value. My grief, when I finally let myself sit with it properly, wasn't for the marriage that ended. It was for the one I had believed I was living in, which turned out to have been, in some essential way, a document full of numbers that didn't add up. I know how to close that kind of file. I know how to open a new one. My house is quiet in the mornings now. I make coffee. I sit at the kitchen table, and I watch the light change over the backyard that I have started, slowly and without any particular plan, turning into a garden. I am not good at gardening. I kill things regularly and have to replace them. But I keep trying, which feels, these days, like enough. Last month my firm promoted me to Director of Risk Advisory. The role involves, among other things, helping corporate clients identify the kind of internal financial irregularities that can go undetected for years inside a trusted structure. I told my new team on the first day, the numbers always tell you something. You just have to be willing to follow them. They think I'm talking about work. I am. I'm also not.